The day Harlow Vance found out she didn't get the promotion, she was standing in the middle of the break room, holding 2 cups of coffee. She had made one for herself and one for Petra. Except Petra had just walked past her without stopping, already moving toward the cluster of people gathering near the glass doors of the boardroom. Harlow set both cups down on the counter and followed the sound. The firm's managing director, Richard, was standing at the front. He thanked everyone for their patience during the review period. He said the decision had not been easy. He said the firm was entering an important phase and needed the right leadership in place. Then he said the name, Brendan. The room applauded. Someone near the back let out a low whistle. Harlow watched Brendan shake Richard's hand, and she recognized the specific kind of smile on his face, the smile of a man who had never really doubted it would go any other way. Brendan had joined Ashdale Financial 11 months ago. His father was a founding partner. Harlow had been there for 9 years. She did not stay for the drinks after. She told her assistant she had a client call, which was true. She sat at her desk and took the call with the same voice she always used, steady, focused, precise, and when it was done she shut her laptop and stared at the screensaver for a long time. Her phone buzzed. It was her younger sister, Nadia. "How did it go?" Harlow typed back, "Next time." Nadia replied with a single word, "No." Harlow put the phone face down. She had been 12 years old the first time she understood that money was a problem. Her family did not talk about directly. Her parents had moved from Montreal to Halifax when her father, a civil engineer, took a contract job that was supposed to last 2 years and turned into 7. The contract ended badly, the firm restructured, and her father was among the first wave let go. He found other work, smaller projects, shorter terms. Her mother had trained as a dental hygienist, but had stopped working when Nadia was born, and never quite returned to it in the same way. They were not poor. But Harlow grew up knowing the difference between stable and fine, and her family had rarely been the first one. She got into Dalhousie on a partial scholarship and worked her way through the rest. She graduated with a degree in finance, and a small amount of debt she paid off in under 2 years by working for a tax preparation firm every season from February to May, while also taking every evening shift her actual employer would give her. Her first real position was at a mid-sized investment advisory firm downtown. She stayed 4 years, learned everything she could, and left when it became clear the ceiling was too low. Ashdale Financial hired her at 27, with a title that sounded better than it was, and a salary she negotiated higher than what they first offered. She had stayed because the work was genuinely interesting, and because she kept getting better at it. Ashdale advised institutional clients, pension funds, regional foundations, a few large family offices, and the problems were complex enough that Harlow never ran out of things to figure out. She built her client relationships carefully. She returned calls the same day. She told clients what they did not want to hear before the numbers made it unavoidable. And when a client's fund underperformed in a quarter, she came to the meeting with an explanation and a plan, not a list of reasons why the market was to blame. By her 5th year, she was managing more assets than anyone else at her level. By her 7th, 3 of the firm's largest institutional clients had specifically requested her by name. She did not expect every good thing she did to be noticed. She had worked long enough to understand that visibility required its own effort. But she also believed that 9 years of results had to count for something. When the firm needed to choose its next director of client strategy, then Brendan arrived. He had an MBA from a school that people mentioned at the start of sentences. He wore clothes that fit a certain way and talked in meetings with the confidence of someone who had never had a reason to doubt whether he belonged in the room. He was not incompetent. Harlow had worked alongside him for 11 months, and she could see that much clearly. He understood the products, knew how to read a room, and could build a presentation that made a complicated idea sound simple. But his client list was thin, his accounts had not grown substantially, and on 2 separate occasions, Harlow had been quietly pulled in to help stabilize relationships that had started to slip under his management. She had not done it to make him look bad. She had done it because the clients mattered and because that was her job. The morning after the announcement, Harlow arrived at the office before anyone else. She made coffee in the break room, took her usual seat, and opened the week's portfolio reports. Nothing about her routine changed. Richard stopped by mid-morning to speak with her. He said the decision had been close. He said her name had come up at every stage of the conversation. He said he hoped she understood the firm valued what she brought and that there would be other opportunities. Harlow thanked him and said she appreciated him taking the time. When he left, she looked back at her screen. She was 34 years old. She had spent 9 years making herself indispensable to a firm that had just handed the senior role to a man who had been there for 11 months because his last name was on the building's original founding documents, framed and hanging in the reception area. She spent the next 2 weeks doing her job exactly as she always had. She called clients, reviewed allocations, flagged 2 risks that neither Brendan nor Richard had noticed in the quarterly summary. She flagged them because the clients deserved to know, and because ignoring a problem had never been a skill she had managed to develop. She also began updating her resume. She told her parents on a Sunday dinner call. Her father was quiet for a moment, then said he hoped she wasn't making a decision from a place of frustration. Her mother asked if she had spoken to anyone at the firm about her options. Harlow said she was being careful. She did not tell them she had already sent 3 applications. Nadia, who was 6 years younger and ran a small pottery studio in Vancouver, said exactly what she had said in the text the evening of the announcement. "You should have left a year ago." Harlow said she was leaving now. "Good," Nadia said. "Stop waiting for them to see what you're worth. They know. They just don't care." The calls Harlow received were not what she expected. 2 of the firms she had applied to responded quickly. Both were interested. One offered her a director-level position, with a larger team than she currently managed, and a compensation package that reflected it. She went through 4 rounds of interviews, answered every question directly, and waited. The offer came in writing on a Thursday morning. She accepted it by Friday afternoon. Harlow gave Ashdale 3 weeks' notice. Richard asked if there was anything the firm could do. She told him she appreciated his time and wished everyone well. She cleaned out her desk on her last day, transferred her files to the colleagues taking over her accounts, and answered every question anyone asked about the client relationship she was leaving behind. When she walked out of the Ashdale office for the last time, the sky over Halifax was gray and flat and cold, the way it got in November. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She had spent 9 years walking into that building. She got in her car and drove home. Westridge Advisory was a different kind of firm. It was older than Ashdale, more conservative in some ways, and more ambitious in others. Its clients were larger. Several of the pension funds it managed represented tens of thousands of plan members across Atlantic Canada. The work required precision at a scale Harlow had not operated at before, and she spent her first weeks doing exactly what she had done 9 years earlier at her first job. She paid attention to everything. The director who had previously held her role had left for a competing firm, and there was a gap in several of the client relationships that Harlow was expected to rebuild. She started by reading every piece of communication that had passed between Westridge and those clients in the previous year. Then she called each one directly. Some clients were warm, others were cautious. One, a regional teachers' pension fund, had been on the edge of moving its account to a competitor before Harlow arrived. Its investment committee was frustrated with response times and what it described as a general lack of clarity about the firm's long-term strategy for their portfolio. Harlow asked if she could attend the next committee meeting in person. She drove 3 hours to do it. She did not go in with a pitch. She went in with a list of questions and a summary of what she had read in the previous month's correspondence. She asked what the committee felt had not been addressed. She asked what they needed to see to feel confident continuing the relationship. She took notes on paper. When she left, the committee chair walked her to the parking lot. "You're different from the last person," he said. "I'm just listening," Harlow said. "That's what I mean." The Teachers Fund did not leave. Over the following year, it expanded its mandate with Westridge by nearly 18%. Harlow's second year at Westridge was the one that began to pull her attention in a direction she had not expected. She had been managing a group of mid-sized clients, foundations and professional associations with portfolios large enough to require careful attention, but not so large that they commanded the firm's senior partners directly. She noticed that several of these clients were making decisions based on information that was either outdated or assembled from sources that did not talk to each other properly. An environmental foundation had its investment data in one system, its grant obligations in another, and its liquidity requirements in a spreadsheet that no one had updated in 2 quarters. When Harlow asked who was responsible for reconciling those, no one in the room was sure. The problem was not unique to that client. Harlow began finding it everywhere she looked. Organizations with legitimate assets and thoughtful people running them, operating with a fragmented picture of their own financial position. They were not making bad decisions so much as they were making decisions with incomplete information. And by the time the gaps appeared, the cost of catching up was already significant. She brought the observation to her managing director, a careful and experienced woman named Constance, who had built most of Westridge's institutional practice herself over 2 decades. Constance listened. Then she said, "What would you do about it?" Harlow said she thought the firm could offer something different, not just portfolio management, but an integrated view of how a client's assets, obligations, and liquidity fit together in real time. She had seen 2 clients avoid significant problems in the past 6 months simply because she had been paying attention to all 3 at once. Constance said, "Write that up." Harlow spent 3 weekends writing it up. The proposal was not long. It described the problem, the clients most likely to benefit, what Westridge would need to build or adapt, and what it would cost compared to the new revenue it could generate. Constance read it and passed it to 2 other senior partners. One wanted to discuss it further. The other said the firm had too many priorities already and suggested revisiting in 18 months. Harlow thanked them, returned to her office, and kept working on the idea on her own. It was not a side project exactly. She did not have a business plan or a corporate registration. She simply began refining how she managed her own client relationships to reflect the model she had described. When one client asked why her reporting looked different from the standard Westridge format, she explained her reasoning. The client asked if everyone at the firm worked this way. Harlow told her it was an approach she was developing. "How much would it cost me to have you doing this full time?" the client asked. It was meant as a compliment, not a proposition. Harlow drove home that evening, thinking about something that was not entirely comfortable to think about. She called Nadia after dinner. "What would you say if I told you I was thinking about leaving again?" Harlow said. "I'd say it's about time. I just got here 2 years ago. I know, and now you've learned what you needed to learn." "So what's the idea?" Harlow explained it. The fragmented information problem. The clients who were making half-informed decisions through no fault of their own. The way she had been solving it quietly inside someone else's firm. Nadia was quiet for a moment. "Do you think you can build it? I don't know." "Do you want to?" Harlow said yes before she fully meant to. She did not leave Westridge immediately. She spent another 6 months testing every part of the idea she could test from within her current role. She identified the exact type of client the model worked best for. She tracked how much time she was already spending on integration work that Westridge wasn't formally billing for. She spoke to 3 former clients, outside her current employer's purview, and asked if they would pay for what she had described. 2 said yes. 1 said she needed to think about it. Harlow began building. She registered a business name on a Saturday morning in March, sitting at her kitchen table in Halifax with coffee she had let go cold. She called it ClearPath Advisory. It was not a dramatic name. It described what she was trying to do, which was to give organizations a clear path through information that was complicated by structure rather than by substance. She gave Westridge 2 months' notice. Constance asked if there was anything the firm could do to keep her. Harlow told her honestly what she was planning. Constance said she thought it was a good idea. She also said she thought Harlow was underpricing herself. "That's something I've heard before," Harlow said. "Then listen this time." Harlow raised her initial rates before she signed her first client. The first year was tight. ClearPath had 3 paying clients by the end of the first quarter, and 5 by the end of the first year. None of them were large. 2 were small foundations with portfolios under $10 million. 1 was a professional association that had been turned down by 2 larger firms because its account wasn't big enough to be worth their time. Harlow took it because the problem was genuine and because she believed a client that size could demonstrate what the model was capable of if things went the way she thought they would. She worked from home for the first 6 months. She hired a part-time bookkeeper and then a junior analyst who had graduated from Dalhousie the previous spring and had sent an application so specific and well-researched that Harlow called him within an hour of reading it. His name was Oscar, and he had written in his cover letter that he was interested in ClearPath specifically because the firm was trying to solve a problem that most advisory firms weren't paying attention to yet. "How did you know what we were trying to do?" Harlow asked during the interview. "There's almost nothing about us online." "I found a quote from you in a conference panel transcript," Oscar said. "You were answering a question about fragmented reporting, and you said, 'Most of these organizations aren't flying blind. They're flying with 3 separate instruments that nobody's looking at the same time.' I thought that was the most accurate description of the problem I'd ever heard." Harlow hired him. The professional association turned out to be the case that changed how ClearPath was able to describe its work. The organization managed a reserve fund for a group of licensed tradespeople across 3 provinces. The money was intended to cover professional liability in the event of claims, but the fund had been managed conservatively to the point where its real purchasing power was declining, while its nominal value appeared stable. The association's leadership knew something felt off. They were not sure what. Harlow spent 6 weeks assembling a complete picture: investment returns, liability exposure, inflation impact on claims costs, and the rate at which current contributions were actually covering projected future obligations. When she presented the findings, she used a single chart that showed the fund's 3 moving parts on one page for the first time in the association's history. The executive director looked at the chart for a long time. Why has no one ever shown us this before? Harlow said it required looking at things that were typically managed separately. And you just looked at them together? That was the core of it. She adjusted the fund's allocation, restructured the contribution schedule to account for claims cost inflation, and rebuilt the reporting format so the board could see all 3 figures in real time. Within 18 months, the fund's actual liability coverage ratio had improved significantly, without requiring a large increase in member contributions. The association referred ClearPath to 2 similar organizations before the year was out. Harlow had spent years inside firms where a good result meant someone else got to present it. At ClearPath, when something worked, it was hers. Not in a possessive way, but in the way that mattered more. She could explain every decision, defend every number, and trace every outcome directly to the reasoning behind it. She did not miss Ashdale. She thought about it occasionally, the way she thought about other things that had once seemed necessary and later turned out to be preparation. She thought about Brendan sometimes, not bitterly, just with the particular clarity that comes from distance. He had been given something he was not ready for, and whether or not he had ever understood that was no longer her concern. She thought more often about the clients she had left behind at Ashdale, the ones who had trusted her and had not asked where she was going. She hoped they were being looked after properly. She suspected some of them weren't. In her 3rd year, ClearPath hired its 4th employee and moved out of the home office into a small space in a building on the waterfront in Halifax. Harlow chose it partly for practical reasons, and partly because she had walked past it for years on her way to work at Ashdale, and it had always seemed like exactly the kind of place that would be good to work. Oscar had become her most trusted colleague. He thought differently than she did, more systematic, less intuitive, and their disagreements were usually the most productive conversations she had. One afternoon, he came into her office and put a client prospectus on her desk. "This one's different," he said. Harlow picked it up. It was a mid-sized private foundation based in Toronto, recently restructured after the death of its founder. The foundation was navigating a transition in investment strategy and had recently parted ways with its previous advisory firm. Why are they looking for someone new? Oscar said he had made some calls. The previous firm had managed the investment side professionally, but had not coordinated well with the foundation's legal team or its grants administrator, and a significant disbursement had been mistimed relative to a portfolio rebalancing, which created a short-term liquidity problem that was embarrassing but not serious. "A reporting gap," Harlow said. "Exactly the kind of thing we fix." She flew to Toronto for the meeting. The foundation was run by a woman named Rowena, who had served on its board for 12 years and taken over as executive director after the founder's death. She was precise and slightly skeptical, and asked Harlow questions that most clients didn't think to ask until something had already gone wrong. Harlow answered all of them directly. At the end of the meeting, Rowena said, "What would you do differently than our last firm?" Harlow said, "I'd make sure you never have to make a decision about your grants program without knowing exactly what your investment position looks like at the same time. Those 2 things are always connected. They should always be visible together." Rowena looked at her. "Our last firm said we were asking for more than was standard." "Standard isn't the same as enough," Harlow said. The foundation became ClearPath's largest client. The referral that followed changed the scale of the firm. Rowena connected Harlow to 2 other Toronto-based foundations that had been managed separately for years and had been considering consolidating their advisory relationships. Both were larger than anything ClearPath had worked with before. Both had the same fragmented information problem Harlow had been solving since her first year. Oscar flew out with her for those meetings. On the way back, he sat across from her on the plane and said, "We're going to need to hire more people." "I know. Like soon, I know." He looked at her. "Does that worry you?" Harlow thought about it. "A little. I don't want to grow past what we can actually do well." Oscar nodded. "Then we figure out what we can do well first, and grow to that." It was the same logic she had used with every client she had ever managed. She said, "You'd have made a good analyst at Ashdale." Oscar looked confused. "I thought you didn't like it at Ashdale." "I didn't. That's what I mean." They hired 2 more advisors that year, both from firms where they had developed strong technical skills and limited room to apply them. Harlow did not look for people who wanted to grow fast. She looked for people who wanted to do the work correctly. 4 years after ClearPath's first client engagement, the firm had 17 clients and a small but focused team. Revenue had grown every year, not dramatically but steadily, in the way that Harlow had always believed real things grew. Not from pressure, but from the kind of trust that accumulates when you keep doing what you said you would do. She had not thought about Ashdale Financial in some time. Then Oscar appeared in her doorway on a Tuesday morning with a look she recognized. The expression he used when he was about to say something he had already decided to say and was just looking for the right moment. "There's a name on the acquisition target list I want you to look at." Harlow looked up. "We've been talking about expanding into the pension fund segment. One way to do that faster is to acquire an existing firm with those relationships already in place." "I know the strategy, Oscar." "Right, so. The list has 17 names on it. 16 of them are straightforward." He paused. "The 17th is Ashdale Financial." Harlow was quiet. "I know," he said. "What's their situation?" Oscar explained it. Richard had retired 18 months ago. Brendan had taken over as managing director. The firm had lost 2 major institutional clients in the past year. A third had reduced its mandate. The advisory team had turned over significantly. Several experienced people had left, and Brendan had replaced them with people who matched his style rather than his clients' needs. The pension fund relationships that had once anchored Ashdale's revenue were eroding, and the firm was struggling to explain to its remaining clients why the results didn't match the projections. Harlow picked up the file. She read it the way she read every financial document, carefully, without emotion, starting with the numbers. The numbers told a familiar story. Ashdale had been growing its new client pipeline, while its client retention had quietly deteriorated. Every large contract signed in the past 2 years had been offset by a departure. The cost of winning each new client had gone up. The value those clients generated over time had gone down. She kept reading. When she finished, she set the file down and looked at the wall for a moment. "What do they have that we want?" she said. "Pension fund relationships," Oscar said. 3 of them are still solid. We've confirmed that. And they have 4 experienced people on the fixed income side who know those accounts well. The rest? The rest would need to be rebuilt. Harlow nodded slowly. "Does the opportunity make sense apart from the history?" "It does," Oscar said. "That's why it's on the list." She thought about the version of this that would be easy to confuse with something else. She had spent 9 years at that firm. She had been passed over for a man who had been there 11 months. She had left without another job lined up and built something from nothing over 4 years. She knew what it would look like from the outside if ClearPath acquired Ashdale now. She also knew that if she removed the name and replaced it with any other firm with the same profile, the decision would be straightforward. "Get me a meeting," she said. The meeting was not comfortable for anyone. Richard was no longer involved. The conversation happened with Brendan, the firm's CFO, and 2 board representatives. ClearPath brought Harlow, Oscar, and their legal counsel. Brendan knew who Harlow was. There was a moment when she walked into the conference room, and he registered her face, and then looked quickly at the documents in front of him. She let the moment pass. She had not come to make anyone feel the weight of what had happened 4 years ago. She had come because the numbers made sense. She spoke about the strategic fit, the pension fund relationships that complemented ClearPath's existing work, the technical staff whose expertise filled gaps in her team, the market position that would give ClearPath years of access without having to build it one account at a time. She also said clearly what would need to change. ClearPath's model depended on integrated reporting and long-term client relationships. That required a different approach than Ashdale had been using. The commission structure would change. The reporting format would change. Some services that had been central to Ashdale's revenue for years were not compatible with what ClearPath was building and would be phased out. Brendan asked which services. Harlow named them. The CFO asked about staffing. Harlow said every member of the Ashdale team would be reviewed individually. The review would be based on role fit, client relationships, and technical capability. She said that plainly, without softening it, because she had found that the most respectful thing she could offer anyone was a clear statement of how decisions would be made. Brendan was quiet for most of the meeting. At the end, he asked one question. "What happens to my position?" The room became very still. Harlow looked at him. "Every leadership role at Ashdale is part of the review. including the managing director position. He said, "So my role is guaranteed. No role is guaranteed. The review is performance-based and position-based. If there's a meaningful role for you in the combined firm, it will be offered." He did not say anything else. The negotiation took several weeks. Ashdale's board initially held out for a higher valuation. Harlow's team walked through the client retention data line by line and showed exactly how much of the firm's stated value depended on accounts that were at risk of leaving, regardless of who owned the firm. When the analysis was done, the number ClearPath had offered looked less like a low offer and more like an accurate one. The acquisition was finalized on a Friday in October. Harlow signed the agreement at her office, with Oscar sitting across from her, and a pot of coffee neither of them touched going cold between them. She did not feel triumphant. She felt responsible in a way that was larger than anything she had managed before. On the first Monday after the announcement, Harlow stood in the main boardroom of the Ashdale office in front of a group of employees who had worked for a firm that was no longer what it had been. Some faces she recognized. Others she did not. The ones who remembered her did not know how to arrange their expressions, and she did not ask them to arrange them any particular way. She told them what ClearPath was and what it was trying to build. She told them what the review process would look like and when they could expect decisions. She told them that the clients they served had trusted this firm through a difficult period and that the first obligation was to those clients. She said, "Most of what made this firm worth acquiring is in this room. The goal is not to dismantle it. The goal is to give it a structure it's been missing." Brendan sat toward the side. He was looking at the table. The review took 3 weeks. 4 people in client-facing roles were reassigned to different positions where their experience was a better fit. One position was removed because the same function already existed within ClearPath's team. Most people kept their roles. Brendan was offered a senior advisor position. Not a leadership role, the scope was narrower than what he had held, but the client relationships he had maintained in his own book of business were still genuine and the work was real. He asked to speak with Harlow before deciding. She agreed. He sat across from her and was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "I know what this must look like from your side. What does it look like?" He thought about it. "Like justice, maybe." Harlow looked at him carefully. "It looks like a business decision," she said. "The same kind of decision you would have made if the performance review had gone the other way." He nodded slowly. "I'm not saying any of it was fair," he said. "What happened with the promotion? I know. I think you would have done the job better." Harlow said nothing for a moment. "I think you might be right," she said. "But I built something I wouldn't trade for it." Brendan stayed. He managed his own accounts within the ClearPath structure and, over the following year, rebuilt 3 client relationships that had been close to leaving. He was good with certain kinds of clients, ones who responded to a particular kind of confidence, and Harlow let him do that work. She did not make his past her ongoing project. The first full year after the acquisition was the hardest ClearPath had ever operated through. Integrating 2 firms required more than combining their client lists. It meant reconciling different systems, different habits, different assumptions about what the work was supposed to accomplish. Some things broke before they got better. A few clients paused their contracts while they evaluated the transition. Harlow stayed late more nights than she had since her first year. Oscar kept hours she had started to find worrying, and she told him directly that she needed him healthy more than she needed him available at midnight. By the end of the first year, the combined firm had stabilized. The pension fund relationships that had made the acquisition worthwhile had transferred cleanly, and ClearPath's integrated reporting model had won over 2 of the 3 funds within 6 months of introduction. One board member at the Teachers Fund, one of ClearPath's original institutional clients, wrote her a letter on paper to tell her that the quality of his committee's decision-making had improved measurably since ClearPath had taken over the account. Harlow kept the letter in her desk drawer. At the annual staff meeting that spring, she stood in front of a team that was now more than 20 people and presented the year's results. Client retention across the combined firm had reached its highest level in either organization's history. Revenue had grown. 2 new institutional mandates had been signed. The integration, while difficult, had not cost them the clients they had set out to serve. When she finished, the room applauded. She looked around and recognized almost every face. Nadia had come from Vancouver for the occasion and was sitting in the back row, smiling in the particular way she had, slightly sideways, like she was daring Harlow to admit that things had turned out exactly the way they should have. Harlow did not make a speech about the past. She moved to the next item. She had spent a long time proving what she could do inside other people's structures. She had finally built one of her own, and the work that happened inside it was the clearest measure of anything she would ever need to say.